about health, it's really about planetary health. And whatever we do in terms of resource consumption, for example, it has an effect on the whole planet. So for example, if the whole world were to live as we are doing here in Western Europe, we would need 3 Earths, like resource-wise. We have been knowing this since quite a long time. In 1972, there was the Limits to Growth book from the Club of Rome. However, the messages have not really arrived in the heads, maybe in the minds, but not in the hearts. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we have to change the storytelling? And also, are there any good news that can motivate people? And a person who has worked on this for quite a long time is our next speaker. He is a sustainability researcher, specialized in ecological footprint, because he is known as the co-inventor of the ecological footprint, a concept that has been developed in the early 1990s. And it's Dr. Mathis Wackernagel. He's also the founder and president of the Global Footprint Network, an organization that is dedicated to making planetary constraints measurable and relevant for policy and economic decision-making. So in his publications and in his work, he really shows how the Earth ecosystem works and also how we can influence it. And his current work focuses on turning overshoot into a motivating force for change. So his keynote is about the planetary overuse and the good news about it. Please welcome Dr. Mathis Wackernagel.
Thank you so much. Good morning, and thank you to all for coming here. Is it sunrise or sunset? We don't know from just a static picture. But I would like to start with saying this talk really is dedicated to the Hanses of the world. And that also includes all the honorary Hanses like Sabine and Tim and Dave and many of you. And my uncle Hans, who was my mentor, who was a zoologist, who actually can think profoundly from a totally different perspective. For example, the insect's perspective. And that opens amazing universes. I hope that's also what we will explore here. Because essentially what we may have forgotten is we are biology. And what's the implication? If you're an animal, and I assume you are, you have a brain. And the brain does a lot of things, but the main thing is it helps us to seek advantage, not in the way of kind of with a goal, but it helps us to react to the habitat and find food, find shelter, etc. And even to a changing habitat. That's why we survive. That's the amazing tautology that Darwin realized, you know, those who survive, like what information is in there, but it says profound implications. So what's our new context? What we have known for probably centuries and much more specifically for 50 years or so is that suddenly we have outgrown our habitat. Before we were a small speck on a big planet, now we are a big speck on a small planet. And we've known that in quantitative terms for a long time. So there have been like congressional hearings about climate change for a very long time. It's now 54 years, you know, we have known about that. And in those years, if you think about all the fossil fuels ever burned in human history, how much was burned since we know it all? How much? Over 80% of all the fossil fuels burned since 1970. If you're born more recently, year 2000, you know, some people remember the last millennium. 50% since then was burned. Here, just the curve, you can see that's where Limits to Growth came out. How massively kind of continue to have the trends. So we know everything. How come we don't react? I think it's because of our brains. We're looking for advantage, and I think people don't see advantage. That's why it's such a drama. So I would like to talk a little bit first about just more detailed where we are at, just descriptively. Don't think about advantage or not advantage. And then the second part will be, may there be some advantages knowing about it? And that was inspired by A dinner conversation, I was with friends at a dinner conversation, we talked about the future, and one person said, let's not talk about this anymore, there are children around the table. What's the disadvantage of better understanding the future? That's for the second part. Anyhow, so when we know we are big now compared to the planet, what does that really mean? How do we know that? How do we measure? Because without numbers, it's hot air from my perspective, but numbers alone don't make the transformation. That's another story we'll be talking about later. But what do we mean by that? For me, the most limiting physical factor for human economies is the ability of ecosystems to regenerate. That's the mother of all resources, and I will talk more about that. You may have heard about planetary boundaries. They're really looking at the conditions that enable this regeneration. If the conditions are not fully there, the outcome of regeneration is compromised. So how can we measure that regeneration? And why is it so important? Because it limits everything. Maybe not everything, that's too absolute, but I mean the bulk of things are limited physically by biocapacity. Food, fibers, like how we addressed, some of it is plastic, but is biological, so that's coming from regeneration. But also fossil fuels. We have so much fossil fuels on the ground. Some of you may remember, are old enough, the atmosphere at the beginning was just CO2. And then thanks to life, the CO2 kind of got sequestered. So we have too much carbon on the ground. If you burn everything, we'll not be able to live. So the limiting factor is how much of the carbon can be absorbed by the biosphere. So again, it's a competing use of regeneration, is how much fossil fuel we can actually use. And then even mining, they had a very good branding office to call it rare earth. Have you heard of rare earth? Have you think, oh my God, rare earths are the most rare thing? They are rare, but even more rare is how much planet we have, how much regeneration we have to give up, to get access to these rare earths and to concentrate them. So I mean, in the end, all these big physical flows are limited by regeneration. That's the game, competition for regeneration. And how do we measure it? By just recognizing, like a farmer, if you plant a tree on this place, a plum tree, you cannot have the apple tree in the same spot, and the cow cannot stand on the same spot either. So things are in competition for regeneration. Some things can go together, but some things are excluding each other, and so we can add up what we exclude. And that's what we do. We look at the world as if it was a farm, because it is. It is a big farm, the biggest farm in the universe we know, called planet Earth. It has so much surface, and then you can calculate how much is productive, how many people are we, how much do we have per person, about 1.5 hectares of ecologically productive space per person in the world. That's just a description. And there are also wild species who also would like some. Some ecologists say maybe half we should leave for other species, but that's another story. Here just kind of the total, what we have, and how much do we use. Oh, a little more, so we are using about 2.6. That's how much area would be needed to regenerate everything we use. How can we use more than what there is? That he must be lying. Actually, it's quite simple. If you have a forest, and then you cut trees more quickly than they regenerate, it's like using a bigger forest. With money, you may be also familiar with it. Some people in Switzerland, we don't know about these people, but some people, they can spend more than what they earn. So that also happens with money, apparently. I've been told. We don't know about that in Switzerland, don't we? So anyhow, so you can then do a ratio. We look at how much do we use compared to how much we have. Then you get this factor 1.7. That's probably an underestimate. We could go into details. Technically, I'm pretty sure it's an underestimate. And then you can translate that into time. If you spend 70% more than what you earn, you take your yearly budget, and you say, by when will I run out of budget? That's what you can do. So you can just translate it into days, and then from January 1st to July 24th last year, we used as much as humanity as Earth can renew in the entire year, not taking into account other species, just kind of for us, So that's just what is. Do you feel empowered? Is that like exciting? Yeah, you're lying a little bit, I think. You need to be excited, but you're actually not. So where's the advantage? Where's the advantage? And I think that's the core question, really, because that's what has held us back. We had the information. And I'm trying to make the case here, and there's more to tell, but all goes back to a very simple insight by somebody who wanted to become governor of California. He didn't make it, but he wrote 100 books. That's not bad. And one of the most famous quotes of his goes a little bit like that. It says, if your salary depends on not understanding. It's just very, very hard to understand. Very hard to understand. So if you think it's a disadvantage, you actually will rebel. And then if you even make the information more accurate and more relevant and more precise, guess what? You don't win them over. You build the wall even higher. The resistance gets even stronger. So if you don't find ways to truly help people see why it's in their advantage to understand their context better, we are not moving forward. It's that simple. Now, let me give you two micro and the macro example why there actually is advantage understanding the future better and why it's okay to talk about this even if children are around the table. And it's the following. The future has never been more predictable than today. Guess what? In the future, I'm pretty sure, people will also eat and drink. And they will also sleep. They also want to be safe. So we know a lot about the future, and we always have. And what we also know is that in any imaginable scenario, there will be more climate change and more resource constraints. We don't know about the combination of the two. We could be very wise and move aggressively out of the fossil fuel dependence, but that would restrict our resource availability and we would have less climate change. So there may be a different combination, but in each pathway, we'll have more climate change and resource constraints. People still talk about the 1.5 Celsius scenario. At the current concentration of greenhouse gases, according to the US government, I don't know why they haven't taken down this page yet, but you can still find it, AGGI, if you Google it. If you include all the greenhouse gases, what's the ppm level now? Over 530. Which, if you just left it at this level, eventually would get to more than 3 degrees. So, so it's kind of, there will be climate change and more resource constraints. So we know a lot about the future. Now, what's the good news? Because it's a cumulative effect, this future is actually coming towards us faster than our physical infrastructure adapts. Like this has been around for a long time. Things don't shift that quickly. So we're already late in the game. It's not about the future. It's our current allocation of assets is suboptimal, we could say. What's the good news in that? That we recognize the big question. If you say what's sustainable, then it feels like a constraint. Oh, we have to add something to a difficult thing already. No, the big question is what's going to be valuable in the inevitable future of climate change and resource constraints? Now I'm going to give you a very tough, wild guess. What's going to be valuable? I think things that will be useful. Wow. Now, that's not a total correlation. There are things like Gucci bags, and they're useful for carrying potatoes, I'm sure. But so value and utility is not always exactly the same, but there's a strong correlation. If something is not useful, it's hard to sell it. Then let me make another step. What do I think will be most useful in that particular future? Assets and capital. And I'm an engineer. I will translate you these words in something physical. What is capital in physical terms? It's capacity. Capacity to do things, to maintain flows like food or housing or whatever it is. It's capacity. What capacities will be useful in the future or more valuable even? I would predict, on average, the most valuable things are things that if you have more of them, the pressure on the planet goes down. Because they will be needed. So they will be needed, the market is there. They will not run into cost constraints. And also, they will not run. They will not run into resource constraints and also not cost constraints, and they will be needed more on average. Now, will they always be successful? I don't know. It's more like playing soccer downhill. That helps you win overall. That may be Messi in his young age on the other side, and you may still lose the soccer game. But overall, the advantages are on your side. So what I want to say is that physical reality and economic strategy is far more aligned than people think. Let me give you an example. If you are a car company, you produce more cars, the cars require resources to be built, actually sell them. Using the cars takes even more resources, so obviously more car factories, more overshoot. Yeah, not so difficult. Then you can think of other examples, like windmill companies. If the windmills you produce, they take resources to be produced. And what I learned yesterday, they actually have now AI to find out what kind of a bird is flying towards them. And then if it's a bird that is close to extinction, they kind of stop. Apparently, that's amazing. It's now operational, I hear. We learned that yesterday, didn't we? Yeah, it's amazing. Anyhow, so if the windmills displace coal power, not additional, but they just displace coal power, then the pressure on the planet goes down, for example. That's something we'll need more in the future. So on average, these kind of technologies are more likely to win. Maybe not tomorrow, but on average, in the long run, it's playing soccer downhill. We worked with a recycling company, and they had a lot of numbers that they got from a great institute that they didn't know what it entails, what does it mean. And so we helped them interpret and say, actually, the big question for you is, do you save resources? In this case, they don't save insects, they save resources. So it takes resources to save resources, and what we found out is that for every unit of resource, the other way, for every unit of resource they used to operate their machines and conveyor belts and everything, they saved 7 units of resources. And so what that means, economically speaking, if you generate €1, I would say, or dollar, I'm not sure, it's probably about similar, value add per year, it requires on average a surface of about 2.5 square meters of ecologically productive space to do that. That's like the size of a single bed. That's the size of ecologically productive space on average for $1 value add. That's the farm for $1 value add. In this case, with every dollar value add, they reduce overshoot by over 30 square meters. So 15 times more in the other direction, nearly. And that's why, like another company we worked with, they said, like, more of us, better planet. That was kind of energizing. So overall, I believe, and that's kind of a misconception that we always think, oh, how much are we need to give up to kind of get there? I would say if you truly think about value generation, what's going to be valuable in the future, there's a total win-win. People think, oh, we have all to collaborate, we have to go to COP, and then we have to come to an agreement, and we didn't come to an agreement, and oh my God, let's wait for another year, and then we can do something. Have you heard that story? Reality couldn't be more different. If you really think about the word, it's the exact opposite. Here's the good news. The less other people prepare themselves for the inevitable future, the more you, with your companies and your cities and your country, are at risk. That's excellent news. Why is it excellent news? Because it shows to wait for others to act is the dumbest thing you can do. So if you can collaborate, it's going to get easier. But if we don't collaborate, your incentive to prepare yourself for the inevitable future gets even higher. Something we haven't fully understood yet, I think. So it's kind of the inverse of what we believe. Anyhow, there are tons of examples. I think I have to come to a closure quickly, but we can go to Power of Possibility on our website, just examples of things you can do that would move Earth Overshoot Day in a good direction. I will not talk much about that, but it's true at the macro scale as well. I believe, and that's kind of, we can go into later on, I believe there's an inevitability. Have you ever heard of OPEC? I think there's an inevitability that there will be an OPEC for nature. That's another big conversation. And that would be in the interest of humanity, by the way. So with that, I would like to kind of conclude. We are entering a future of climate change resource constraints. That's just context. It's not your burden. It's just kind of the backdrop of our stage. This is our context. So we talked about the companies, overshoot as a context, if you recognize that, so we can make better decisions. For countries, the same thing. Oops. It's not about predicting or being right or wrong. It's just about, can I help you win your bets? You know, if you think the context is irrelevant to you, then probably we have not much to talk with each other, and that's fine. And really, it is like petroleum is not the future, it's regeneration, and there the insects play obviously a crucial role. And so thank you, Hans, for getting us all together, and so glad to be here. Thank you so much.